She sat still on the edge of the floral-print sofa, her hands wrapped tightly around the teacup that had long gone cold. From the kitchen, the sound of her daughter's voice drifted in like a breeze that carried splinters. "I can't leave my kids with her anymore. She's getting forgetful. She's old. What if she just forgets they're even there?" Laughter followed, light, careless, oblivious, and it broke something small but vital inside the older woman's chest. Her fingers tightened against the delicate porcelain, not hard enough to break it, but just enough to feel the crack that didn't yet show on the surface. She stared blankly at the family photo on the far wall. Her daughter, and the two grandkids, taken only last winter, before all the signs, the slights, the silent turning of backs. The children ran through the room, squealing with joy, chasing each other with the wildness of youth, and not one of them looked her way. Not a "Hi, Grandma," not even a glance. She wasn't invisible. She was something less, something unnecessary. That night, after the dishes had been washed and the house had gone dim, her daughter stood in the doorway to the guest room, arms folded in the soft, condescending way people use when they're about to shatter you with kindness. "You've done enough. Why don't you just rest now?" The older woman looked up, her eyes searching for some trace of warmth, of recognition, of all the sleepless nights she'd given up rocking this very woman to sleep. The illnesses tended, the sacrifices, no one ever asked for but always expected. But the only thing reflected back was detachment, a firm, polite rejection dressed up as concern. "You've done enough." The words repeated in her head like a hymn of dismissal. She nodded slowly, not trusting her voice, and pulled the comforter up over her lap as her daughter left the room. Alone in the quiet, she touched the edge of her will, the one she kept folded inside a journal in her suitcase, and wondered if love, too, had an expiration date. There was no anger yet. No plans, just silence, just heartbreak. The kind that blooms slowly, without sound, until one day you wake up and realize that your place in someone's life has already been packed away. There was a time, not too long ago in her bones, even if decades had passed, when the only thing that kept her going was the weight of a child in her arms and the promise that tomorrow would be better. She had been 28 when the accident happened. One moment, she was cooking dinner and humming to the radio, and the next, the phone rang with a voice that cracked her world open. Her husband, her partner, her one safe place, gone. A car crash on a rainy Tuesday evening had made her a widow and a single mother in one breath. And from that day forward, it was just her and her daughter against the world. Nursing school was supposed to be her escape, her plan to build a future with security and pride, but she folded that dream neatly into a drawer and locked it away. There was no room for ambition when bills piled up like bricks, each one heavier than the last. She worked days at the diner, evenings cleaning offices, and weekends at the senior, home feeding strangers while her own body ached for rest. Every birthday was handmade, every holiday stitched together with love and what little she could afford. She sacrificed without ever calling it that, because love made it feel like breathing, hard, yes, but essential. When her daughter got older, she worked extra shifts to pay for tutoring, music lessons, prom dresses. When it came time for college applications, the woman smiled through sleepless nights and sold her wedding jewelry so her daughter wouldn't have to worry about tuition. Deposits. She even co-signed the loan for that first little house with the blue shutters and the crooked mailbox. Every inch of her savings gone, because her daughter's happiness was her own. Then came the grandkids, little whirlwinds of joy and exhaustion. And once again, she rose with the sun and stayed awake through the darkest hours. School runs, doctor appointments, lunchboxes packed with love, bedtime stories whispered while their mother worked late. She even stayed overnight when her daughter went on work trips or romantic getaways. She was the glue, the shadow, the silent force that held everything together. Never once did she ask to be paid. Never once did she say she was tired, though sometimes her knees burned like fire and her hands trembled when she stirred the soup. She did it with joy, because this family, was the life she had built. Her daughter used to call her every afternoon saying, "I don't know what I'd do without you." And the older woman would smile and reply, "You'll never have to find out." But now the silence was deafening. That same daughter, once so full of dependence and affection, now looked at her with pity, like she was furniture that had gone out of style. No more afternoon calls, no more "thank you," no more "Mom, I need you." The past, it seemed, was forgotten. All those years, all that sacrifice, it didn't vanish. It was erased. It was a Wednesday when she arrived with a bag of freshly baked muffins, the kind her grandson liked with the chocolate chips still gooey in the middle. She let herself in with the key she had always used, because this was her second home, or so she had believed. But the moment she stepped into the living room, something felt wrong. There was laughter, children's voices, yes, but unfamiliar. Tones, too. A woman, younger, bouncier, maybe 30, maybe less, sat cross-legged on the rug, painting with the kids like she belonged there. The older woman froze in the doorway, still clutching the paper bag, as the younger woman turned and smiled with forced politeness, not recognition. Her daughter appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and the air in the room grew too tight, like a secret had just stood up in full view. "Oh," her daughter said, her smile stretched and uncomfortable. "I meant to call you." The older woman didn't speak. She didn't have to. The look on her face said everything. "This is Jenna," her daughter continued, gesturing. "I needed someone younger, more reliable. You understand, right?" No, she didn't. Or maybe she did, too well. Her daughter didn't wait for a response. She breezed past, as if this betrayal wasn't deep and final, as if it were just logistics. The older woman looked around, searching instinctively for her slippers under the armchair, her knitting needles in the basket beside the couch. Gone. All of it. Like she had never been there. Like she was just a phase the family had outgrown. "Oh, and Mom, moving forward," her daughter said, pausing at the hallway. "Just call before dropping by, okay?" The words hit harder than expected. Not cruel, not shouted, just firm, deliberate, a line in the sand. She stood there a moment longer, watching Jenna tie her granddaughter's ponytail, a motion she had done 100 times. Her hands, the same ones that had once swaddled her daughter at birth, now felt foreign and empty. She turned slowly, the bag of muffins still warm in her hand, and walked out without saying goodbye. Back at her tiny apartment, she placed the muffins untouched on the counter, sank into the worn armchair, and sat in silence. Not grief, not even anger, just the stillness that follows when something inside you stops believing in a place you once called home. At first, she thought it was just a busy week, then 2, then a month. The silence grew slowly, so deceptively, like dust gathering in the corners of a once lived-in room. She checked her phone constantly, scrolling through missed calls, texts, reminders, nothing. No more updates about dance recitals, no photos of lost teeth, no breathless calls from her daughter asking if she could swing by for just an hour or two. The house, once filled with little shoes at the door and backpacks slumped by the table, now echoed only with the hum of the fridge and the creak of her own footsteps. She baked a batch of cookies, the same chocolate chip recipe her grandson used to call magic. She placed them in a tin with a note and waited 2 days before finally walking it to their front porch, hoping maybe it would be enough to reopen the door. But the tin stayed there, untouched, for nearly a week, until the rain turned the note to pulp and the cookies to regret. When her granddaughter's birthday rolled around, she waited by the phone. She had already knitted a bright purple scarf, her favorite color, and even wrapped it in gold paper with a bow she made by hand. But no one called. No invitation arrived. She found out only later that the party had happened, filled with bouncing, castles and balloons and laughter captured in glittering photos on her daughter's public profile. There they were, cake-covered cheeks and candle-lit eyes, and not a trace of the woman who had once held those same little faces through fevers and bad dreams. She scrolled through the images like an outsider pressing her face to the glass of a life that had shut her out. One afternoon, while she watered the potted lilies on her small balcony, the neighbor from 2 doors down smiled and said, "Didn't you used to always be with your grandkids? You two were inseparable." She nodded, kept her smile steady, murmured something vague and kind. But as soon as the door shut behind her, she crumpled. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of everything unspoken. In the stillness of her living room, with the unfinished scarf draped limply across her lap, she wept, not from anger or even sadness, but from the ache of being erased so thoroughly by the very people she had built her world around. The rain had tapped gently against the windows all morning, the kind of soft, persistent drizzle that made everything feel heavier. She moved slowly through her apartment, cleaning shelves that didn't need cleaning, rearranging drawers simply, to pass the time. Her fingers, worn but steady, tugged open an old jewelry box she hadn't touched in years. It still smelled faintly of lavender and cedar, the scent of another life, another time. Inside were the usual relics, a tarnished brooch, a pair of clip-on earrings she hadn't worn since the 90s, a locket with a photo too faded to make out. She almost closed it again when something at the very bottom caught her eye. A folded, yellowed envelope with her name written in her husband's handwriting. Her heart stumbled. She sat down slowly, hands trembling as she opened it. Inside was a letter, the ink faded but legible, and tucked behind it, a legal document with a county seal. Her eyes scanned the page, her name, the plot number, the signature of the county clerk. It was a deed, a small piece of land left in her name by her husband years ago, untouched and nearly forgotten. She blinked hard, her breath catching. She had no memory of ever receiving it. Maybe because in the blur of grief and survival, she'd boxed so many things away, physically and emotionally. The letter was dated 6 months before his death. His words, still full of warmth, poured out like a voice from the past. "If you're reading this, it means life didn't go the way we hoped. Take care of her, our girl. But don't forget to take care of you too. You've always been the strongest of us. Promise me you'll find peace, even if it's not with me." She pressed the paper to her lips, then her chest, and sat for a long time, letting the weight of his words settle inside her like a forgotten song. She could almost hear him again, his laughter in the hallway, the way he used to call her by that old nickname no one had said in decades. The deed clutched in her hands wasn't just property, it was proof. Proof that someone had once trusted her, seen her, believed she could build something for herself, not just survive for others. The next morning, she took the bus downtown, clutching a file folder to her chest. At the county records office, the KD clerk, a tired man with kind eyes, confirmed it. The land was still hers, never sold, never claimed by anyone else. Her name was still on the record. "You've got good fortune," he said. "Most people don't realize what they've got until it's too late." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Later that week, she met her friend Lorraine for tea, an old companion from church who had practiced family law before, retiring. Lorraine, always sharp, looked over the paperwork and nodded approvingly. "It's real, it's clean, and it's yours. No one can touch it but you." She paused, then added with a gentle smirk, "It's about time you stopped being everyone's foundation and started building something of your own." The words sat with her for hours afterward, humming beneath her ribs like a heartbeat she hadn't heard in years. That night, she pulled the letter from her husband out again. take care of her, but don't forget to take care of you." She whispered it aloud, letting it echo in the quiet apartment. Maybe she had done too well at the first part, devoting every ounce of herself to raising her daughter, to being available, helpful, present. She had worn her usefulness like armor, and now that it was no longer needed, she had nothing left to shield her from the cold. But now, she had something, a start, a place, a purpose that didn't revolve around waiting for the phone to ring or hoping for an invite that would never come. The sadness didn't leave her. Grief, especially the slow kind, doesn't just pack up and go. But it changed. It shaped itself into something steadier, into quiet resolve. She wasn't just forgotten. She had been misplaced. But now, she would find herself again. Not to prove anything to them, but to remember who she was before the world told her she was only worth what she could give. She moved like a shadow through the process, quiet and deliberate, never letting emotion rush her. Steps. The land, long forgotten by everyone but her late husband, turned out to be far more valuable than she could have imagined. A local developer, eager to expand luxury housing near the city outskirts, offered her a sum that left her stunned in the privacy of her lawyer's office. She didn't flinch, didn't counter, just nodded once and signed the papers. She walked out with a check and a straight spine, her heart thudding with something new. Maybe freedom, maybe justice, maybe both. The next day, she sat at her kitchen table, a strong cup of black tea in hand, and took out her will. The same one she'd updated years ago to leave everything to her daughter. She flipped to the final page, uncapped her pen, and rewrote it. In ink so bold it looked almost defiant on the paper. Her daughter's name crossed out. In its place, she wrote the name of a local women's shelter she had once volunteered at in her younger days, back when her husband was still alive and her daughter was still sweet. Then, with a calm sense of finality, she drafted a trust fund that would go toward a community daycare for single mothers who had no one to lean on. She thought about all the women who'd been discarded by their own families, all the grandmothers raising grandchildren on fumes and fading respect. This was for them, and for the version of herself that once didn't know she was allowed to have dreams beyond sacrifice. She found the cottage 2 weeks later, small, tucked away by the lake, with hydrangeas blooming by the fence and a screened porch that faced the water. It wasn't grand, but it was perfect. For once, she put the deed in her name alone. No cosigners, no strings, no one else to appease or carry. The agent smiled and said, "You'll love it here. It's quiet, peaceful." And she replied, "That's exactly what I want." She moved in slowly, savoring every moment. She painted the walls in soft earth tones, unpacked each item with care. The silence of the cottage wasn't empty like before. It was full of intention. She woke up early each morning to the sound of birds, not crying children or harsh requests. She made her tea and watched the water ripple with wind. She began knitting again, this time not for someone who might ignore it, but for herself, a blanket in warm, golden tones, like sunlight she could hold. But she knew she couldn't disappear without a final act of clarity. Not cruelty, just truth. She returned to her daughter's house one last time, in the early morning, when she knew no one would be home. She let herself in with the spare key, still hanging behind the porch light, and walked slowly through what used to be her second home. It no longer felt like it belonged to her. Her slippers were gone. The photo of her and the children had been moved. The air felt cleaner, emptier, like her presence had already been scrubbed away. She went to the kitchen, placed the apartment keys gently on the counter, and next to them, a folded letter in her own handwriting. She took a moment to look around, then left the door unlocked behind her, a final gesture of exit. The letter was short, but it carried weight. "You said I should rest. You were right. I've found a place to do that now. I won't be needing the apartment anymore. The lease is paid through the year. I've left the muffins you used to love in the freezer. This isn't meant to hurt you. It's simply meant to be heard. I gave everything I had, and I don't regret it. But now, I'm giving to myself. That's not abandonment. That's balance. Take care of the children. Love them well. And maybe one day, understand what it means to be left out of a life you built. She didn't sign it with her usual mom or love you always. She signed it with her name, her full name, for the first time in years. The identity she had buried under the weight of being a mother, a grandmother, a helper, a crutch. As she walked away from the house, she didn't cry. She didn't look back. Her voice hadn't been raised, her anger never screamed. But she had spoken louder than any argument ever could. She had reclaimed her life, and that was her victory. Her daughter didn't find the letter right away. It sat unnoticed for days, buried under unopened mail and school permission slips, sitting quietly on the kitchen counter next to the keys her mother had left behind. Life moved forward, as it tends to do. Messy breakfasts, tantrums, work calls, ballet recitals. It wasn't until she finally cleared the clutter that she saw the envelope, her name written in the unmistakable script of the woman she hadn't called in weeks. A strange chill swept through her as she opened it. No fanfare, no anger, just words, simple and final. I may be too old to babysit, but I'm not too old to start over. I won't be needing the apartment anymore. The keys clinked beside. The letter, suddenly unbearably loud in the silence of the kitchen. Something inside her twisted, an unease that wasn't guilt, not yet, but the beginning of realization. She read the letter again and again until the words etched themselves into the hollowness that had crept into her chest. She made a few calls. Her mother didn't answer. Neither did Lorraine, the old family friend who used to bring lemon bars to birthdays. No one had seen her. But the silence had shifted. It wasn't absence. It was intent. By the end of the Isabadiar week, her daughter received an official letter from a lawyer's office. The estate had been revised, the will updated. She was no longer the beneficiary. Everything, every cent, every asset, every trace of legal attachment had been rerouted. To a women's shelter, a daycare, a handful of charitable causes that, ironically, reflected all the things her mother had done without recognition for decades. Her daughter sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the document, reading her own name crossed out in favor of strangers. No warning, no negotiation, just quiet, unshakable truth. She had been removed, completely. Her initial reaction was disbelief. Then came a peculiar kind of fury, rooted not in what was lost, but in the fact that her mother had acted without permission. As if she'd dared to matter outside the narrow role she was expected to play. As if she still belonged to herself. Word spread quickly. It always did. The neighborhood, once used to seeing the grandmother in oversized sweaters and sensible shoes, pushing a stroller or walking hand in hand with her grandkids, now whispered about her in awed tones. Did you hear? She walked away. She gave. It all away. Started over. You wouldn't believe how peaceful she looks in those pictures. Photos began surfacing. Someone's cousin had seen her at the lake house. Then came the image. Her, sitting on a porch swing, a cup of coffee in hand, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her eyes from the morning sun. Next to her, women of her age, laughed over pastries wrapped in shawls she might have knit herself. She looked peaceful. She looked lighter. She looked like someone who had finally exhaled after holding her breath for 30 years. There were no children clinging to her ankles, no errands, no expectations, just water, sky, and the kind of silence that feels earned. Back in the city, the daughter noticed things she hadn't before. The ache in her back from bending over. Alone, the weight of parenthood without backup, the small but sharp sting of absence. She watched the kids play and realized they hadn't asked about Grandma in days. Maybe they assumed she'd just faded away, like old toys or a favorite cartoon that stopped airing. The daughter tried to piece it together, where things had turned. She thought back to the day she'd hired Jenna, how practical it had seemed at the time. Efficiency, reliability, youth. She hadn't considered how cutting those words might have sounded. She hadn't imagined a world where her mother wouldn't just quietly endure it. Because that's what mothers do, right? They stay, they help, they don't leave. But hers had, and that was the part that wouldn't let her sleep. In time, her mother became a quiet legend, not loud, not boastful, just steady and powerful, like roots reclaiming cracked pavement. Women at the shelter spoke of a donor who sat with them, listened, asked questions like, "What do you need?" instead of, "What did you do wrong?" At the daycare, her name was on a plaque by the new reading corner, carved into oak, in honor of those who gave without asking. The community spoke of her with reverence, not because she had burned bridges, but because she had simply stopped crossing them for people who wouldn't meet her halfway. She didn't have to raise her voice. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. Her revenge wasn't rage. It was absence. It was peace. It was the undeniable truth that the most powerful thing a woman can do, especially one who has been depended on, used, dismissed, is to say no more and mean it. And she had meant it. Every word, every step, every breath of her new life by the lake was proof that you are never too old to start over and never too late to remember your worth. The calls came first, one after another, each with a new tone. At first, it was casual, like nothing had happened. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Call me back." Then, a bit more pointed. "I saw your letter. I think we should talk, please." The texts followed rapidly, some laced with guilt, others with something closer to desperation. "The kids miss you. I didn't mean it like that. It wasn't personal. Can we just reset?" Each one was read. None were answered. She sat in her cottage by the window, the lake rippling quietly outside, her tea warm in her hand, and listened to the silence she had come to treasure. It wasn't coldness that kept her from replying. It was clarity. There had been too many years of rushing to pick up the phone, too many nights spent explaining away carelessness, too many moments of biting her tongue to preserve a relationship that only ever seemed to tighten its grip when she gave more. And now, for once, she had no obligation to explain herself. Her email filled with long paragraphs, apologies dressed in excuses, promises to do better, stories of how the kids were asking questions. But even those began to blur together, repeating the same refrain. "Come back. Be who you were. Let's pretend this didn't happen." But she wasn't who she was anymore. That woman, the one who always showed up, who always forgave, who quietly made herself smaller so others could feel big, was gone. Or maybe, finally, she was whole. She did nothing dramatic with the messages. She didn't delete them. She didn't block anyone. She just let them sit, unanswered, like echoes that couldn't find a place to land. Then came the card. A pale, pink envelope, childlike handwriting, stickers on the edges. She recognized her granddaughter's penmanship instantly, clumsy and endearing. Inside was a drawing of the two of them holding hands in front of what was clearly meant to be the old apartment building. Below it, the words, "I miss you, Grandma. Please come back. I love you." Her heart clenched. She held the card to her chest and closed her eyes, letting the ache run its course. Then she took out a fresh note card, one of the pretty ones, with watercolor edges she'd bought at the lake shop. She wrote in gentle cursive, the same way she used to sign field trip forms and birthday cards. "Love you always. Grandma." She kissed the envelope before sealing it, walked it to the post office herself, and sent it back with a deep breath and no return address. That was the only reply she ever gave. She chose peace. Not silence as punishment, but as protection. Her, Days unfolded slowly, rhythmically. Morning walks by the lake, letters to new friends, books read in a rocking chair on the porch. Sometimes she missed the children's voices, the chaos of a house full of life. But she didn't miss being invisible. In that noise, she didn't miss having to prove her worth again and again, just to be given scraps of respect. Her phone remained fully charged and untouched on the counter. When it buzzed, she didn't look. When it rang, she let it ring. She had said everything she needed to say without raising her voice, and that was enough. The transformation wasn't sudden, but it was real. It happened in small, ordinary ways, like saying yes when the woman at the cafe invited her to a local book club, or smiling at the cashier instead of keeping her eyes on the floor. The first time she walked into that book club meeting, she felt like a child on the first day of school, unsure, exposed, heart-braced for rejection. But the women there, some with silver hair and others in wide-rimmed glasses, welcomed her without hesitation. No one asked why she had come alone. No one looked through her like glass. They simply pulled up a chair and made room. They spoke about characters in novels who dared to reinvent themselves in the second half of life, and though none of them said it aloud, everyone in that circle understood what that meant. She laughed more that night than she had in years, and, for the first time, the sound didn't surprise her. It felt right. Soon, her little cottage began to feel alive. On Sundays, the dining table filled again, not with the family that had shut her out, but with other grandmothers who carried their own quiet aches and untold stories. They brought over casseroles, home-baked bread, childhood photos. They sat for hours swapping memories, sharing tears, and rediscovering the parts of themselves they'd shelved to make room for everyone else. No one asked for more than what was offered. No one judged. They were simply women who had learned to carry the weight of love and absence in the same pocket, and were finally allowed to set it down. She grew herbs by the windowsill and planted tomatoes near the back fence. In the morning, she pulled weeds in the garden with her hands in the dirt, the sunlight on her back, and no voice calling her inside to do something else. The silence no longer stung, it comforted. It wasn't a reminder of what was missing. It was a sign of everything she'd reclaimed. Some nights, she would sit on the porch with a warm blanket over her lap, listening to the soft lapping of the lake and the wind in the trees. She would think of her past, not with bitterness, but with softness. Yes, she had been dismissed, forgotten, used, but she had also survived it. More than survived, she had found herself on the other side. She wasn't the burden, she was the foundation, and now, finally, she was her own. She laid the linen napkin gently across her lap, smoothing its corners with care. The table was set with a single plate, a polished fork and knife, and a glass of red wine that caught the last light of the evening sun. Soft music played in the background, an old jazz record she used to listen to when she was young and still allowed to dream. The scent of rosemary roasted chicken filled the cottage, mingling with the fresh lake breeze drifting through the open window. Outside, the water shimmered like it was exhaling with her. There were no voices calling for her, no schedules to meet, no needs to fill but her own. One chair, one plate, one woman. She sat with her back straight, her eyes soft, and lifted her glass to no one and everyone at once. She took a sip, smiled, to herself, and cut the first bite of dinner. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she didn't feel lonely. She felt complete. The silence didn't press on her anymore. It held her gently. This time, she ate at her table, alone, and free.